sun had already set, and the forest was dark and foreboding. As she made her way down the path, she sobbed uncontrollably, her tears blurring her vision. She wasn't paying attention when she almost ran into an old lady standing by the side of the road. The woman was hunched over, her body frail, her skin wrinkled like the bark of an ancient tree. She wore tattered clothes, and her eyes were sharp. She licked an old woman's rotten wound, and everything changed. Once upon a time, many years ago, in a small village that no longer exists, there lived a young girl. Her name was Moronke. Moronke was born into a family that wasn't poor but also wasn't rich. They had enough cowries and farmlands to be comfortable, and life for the most part was good. Her parents, Yeye Biye and Baba Oguntade, were all respected in the village, known for their hard work and kindness. Moronke herself was the apple of their eyes, a happy, beautiful child. She had the world at her feet and was beloved by all who knew her. She was kind, respectful towards the elders, and always ready to lend a hand. Her laughs were infectious, her presence a light that brightened any room. But as life would have it, the good times did not last forever. Moronke's world came crashing down the day her mother, Yeye Biye, fell ill. What began as a simple fever turned into a long, agonizing sickness. And after weeks of suffering, Yeye Biye passed away, leaving Moronke and her father heartbroken. Moronke cried for days, unable to comprehend life without her mother. Baba Oguntade was equally devastated, but as a man of the house, he had to remain strong for his daughter. For 2 years, Baba Oguntade tried his best to care for Moronke, cooking meals, braiding hair, and making sure she felt loved. But despite his efforts, there was a hole in their household, a gaping wound that couldn't be healed. Moronke needed a mother figure, so Baba Oguntade made the difficult decision to marry again. The new wife, Lankere, seemed kind at first. She treated Moronke with care, spoke to her gently, and tried to make her feel loved. For a time, it appeared that things would return to some sense of normalcy. Moronke missed her real mother dearly, but never disrespected Lankere, doing her best to make peace with a new situation. But everything changed after Lankere gave birth to her own child, a baby girl. Suddenly, Moronke became a nuisance in her own home. The affection and care Lankere once showed evaporated, replaced by coldness and disdain. It started with little things. Moronke being asked to fetch water more often, to sweep the yard and clean the dishes. But it quickly escalated. Soon, Moronke was being sent to the river to fetch water multiple times a day. Her hands raw from carrying heavy jugs. She wasn't allowed to play with friends anymore. Her clothes became tattered, her hair unkempt. The once beautiful girl, who was the joy of her household, now looked like a shadow of her former self. Worst of all, Baba Oguntade could do nothing. It was as if a spell had been cast over him. He no longer saw Lankere's cruelty for what it was. Lankere had a charm on him, clouding his judgment, and he became indifferent to Moronke's suffering. When she tried to complain, he would scold her, saying she was making too much trouble for her stepmother. There was one particular item in the household that Lankere valued above all else: a clay scoop known as Igbako. It was not just an ordinary scoop, but one passed down through Lankere's family, and she treated it like a treasure. Every day after cooking, Lankere would task Moronke with taking the igbako to the river, which was several miles from their home, to wash it. She instructed her to be quick and return before dusk, not because she was concerned for Moronke's safety, but because she feared something might happen to the igbako. Moronke dreaded these trips. They were long and lonely, and as she scrubbed the clay scoop by the river, tears would often fall from her eyes. She missed her mother terribly and wished she could run away from the life of suffering that had befallen her. One fateful day, as she stood by the river, the weight of everything became too much to bear. She began to sing a song, her voice carrying over the water. It was a song her mother used to sing to her, a song of hope and freedom. As she sang, the birds in the trees above her joined in, and even the fish in the river seemed to swim in rhythm to her voice. But in a moment of distraction, tragedy struck. The igbako slipped from her hand and fell onto a rock. With a sickening crack, the clay scoop shattered into pieces. Moronke froze. Her heart raced as she stared at the broken pieces on the ground, knowing what awaited her at home. Lankere would beat her without mercy. Moronke cried for what felt like hours, terrified of what was to come. As dusk began to fall, she gathered her courage and returned home. When she arrived, Lankere immediately asked for the igbako. Moronke, trembling, explained what had happened. Lankere's eyes filled with rage, and without a word, she grabbed a switch and beat Moronke until her legs were covered in welts. "Go back to the river," Lankere spat, "and don't return until you found my igbako." Moronke, with her body aching and her heart heavy, ran back toward the river. The sun had already set, and the forest was dark and foreboding. As she made her way down the path, she sobbed uncontrollably, her tears blurring her vision. She wasn't paying attention when she almost ran into an old lady standing by the side of the road. The woman was hunched over, her body frail, her skin wrinkled like the bark of an ancient tree. She wore tattered clothes, and her eyes were sharp despite her age. Moronke greeted her politely and tried to walk past, but the old woman stopped her. "Why are you crying, my child?" the old woman asked, her voice raspy but gentle. Moronke, in her desperation, told the old woman everything. About her mother's death, her father's marriage to Lankere, and the cruel treatment she endured. She explained how she had broken the igbako and feared returning home without it. The old woman listened intently, and when Moronke was finished, she smiled, revealing a set of crooked, yellowing teeth. "I can help you," she said. "But first, you must do something for me." "What is it, grandmother?" Moronke asked, eager for any chance at help. The old woman lifted her tattered clothes to reveal a large, festering wound on her leg. The sight of it made Moronke recoil in disgust. The wound was rotten, oozing pus and smelled of decay. "Lick my wound," the old woman said, her smile never faltering. "Lick it, and I will give you what you seek." Moronke stared at the wound, her stomach churning. She couldn't believe what the old woman was asking of her. It was revolting, but the thought of returning home without the igbako and facing Lankere's wrath was worse. Slowly, reluctantly, She lowered herself to her knees, closed her eyes, and leaned in to do as the old woman asked. "Stop!" the old woman suddenly shouted, startling Moronke. "You don't have to do it, child. It was a test." Moronke opened her eyes in confusion. The old woman smiled and softened. "I wanted to see how far you were willing to go for your freedom," she said. "You are a good child, Moronke. You have suffered enough." The old woman pointed toward a small hut at the edge of the forest. "Go to that hut," she instructed. "Inside, you will find many gods. Take the first one you see when you enter and bring it home. When you get home, break it open. You will find what you need." The old woman paused, her expression growing serious. "But remember this. No matter what other gods you see in that hut, no matter how big or beautiful they may seem, you must only take the one directly in front of you. Do you understand?" Moronke nodded, thanked the old woman, and hurried off to the hut. When she reached the hut, it appeared small and unassuming from the outside. But as soon as she stepped inside, she was astonished. The hut seemed to expand into a massive hall with hundreds of gods lining the walls and floors. Some were small and plain, while others were enormous, shining with gold and intricate designs. Moronke was tempted by the larger, more beautiful gods, but she remembered the old woman's warning. She kept her eyes fixed on the small, plain god that sat directly in front of her. She picked it up, turned, and quickly left the hut without looking back. When Moronke returned home, she locked herself in her room and broke the god open, just as the old woman had instructed. To her astonishment, gold pieces, cowries, and other precious items spilled out, enough to make her the richest woman in the entire village. Among the treasures was the very same igbako she had broken earlier, perfectly whole. Moronke could hardly believe her eyes. She gathered the igbako and returned it to Lankere, who took it back with a suspicious look. Moronke, now wealthy beyond imagination, moved out of her father's house and into her own home, where she lived in peace and comfort. But Lankere, filled with suspicion and envy, couldn't understand how Moronke had suddenly come into such wealth. The once mistreated girl now had riches beyond her wildest dream, and Lankere's jealousy grew day by day. Her own life, which had once seemed comfortable, now felt insignificant in comparison. She could no longer bear to see Moronke live a better life than she did. 2 years passed, and Lankere's envy turned into obsession. She spent every waking moment plotting ways to find out Moronke's secret. One day, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, she paid Moronke a visit. Moronke, despite all that had happened, was still kind and respectful toward her stepmother. She welcomed Lankere into her home with a smile. After some pleasantries, Lankere asked in a falsely sweet tone, "My dear Moronke, I've been wondering, how did you come by all this wealth? You were once poor and had nothing. Now you live in such luxury. What's your secret?" Moronke hesitated at first, unsure if she should reveal the truth. But after some thoughts, she decided that perhaps sharing the story might bring peace between them. So, she told Lankere everything, from her encounter with the old woman to the magical god that brought her wealth. Lankere listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she heard about the old woman in the forest and the small huts filled with gods. The moment Moronke finished her story, Lankere could hardly contain her excitement. She thanked Moronke, though her gratitude was insincere, and hurried back to her home. Her mind racing with plans, that night Lankere couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, consumed by the thoughts of the riches that could be hers. She imagined herself living in greater luxury than Moronke, with gold, cowries, and fine clothes at her disposal. The next morning, Lankere set out for the forest. Determined and desperate, she searched for hours until she finally found the old woman sitting under a tree, just as Moronke had described. Lankere, breathless from her long search, wasted no time. I have come to claim my riches, just as you gave them to Moronke, she demanded. The old woman looked at Lankere, her sharp eyes studying her greed and impatience. She smiled knowingly. But can you do what it takes? The old woman asked. Lankere, eager to get her hands on the treasure, nodded quickly. Yes, whatever it is, I will do it. Without a word, the old woman lifted her tattered cloak to reveal the same rotten, festering wound she had shown Moronke. The sight of it made Lankere's stomach churn, and she instinctively stepped back in horror. The smell was unbearable, the wound oozing with pus and decay. Lick it, the old woman said, her voice calm and steady. Lick my wound, and I will give you what you seek. Lankere's face twisted in disgust. Ewo, I cannot do that, she cried, recoiling even further. That is too vile. I am not a common beggar. The old woman smiled slyly, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Very well, she said. If you cannot lick the wound, then go to the huts in the forest. Inside, you will find many gods. But remember, you must only take the one that is directly in front of you. Do not touch any of the others, no matter how tempting they may be. Lankere nodded eagerly and ran toward the hut, without so much as a thank you. Her heart pounded with excitement as she imagined the riches that awaited her. When she reached the hut, it appeared small and ordinary, just as Moronke had described. But as soon as she stepped inside, her eyes widened in awe. The seemingly humble hut expanded into a vast chamber, filled with gods of all sizes, shapes, and colors. Some were so large they nearly touched the ceiling. Others glimmered with gold, and still others sparkled with jewels. Lankere's greed flared. She glanced at the small, plain god in front of her, the one the old woman had instructed her to take, but it seemed insignificant compared to the larger, more beautiful ones. She scoffed at the small god and turned her attention to the grandest god in the room. It was enormous, gilded in gold and encrusted with precious stones. Why settle for less? Lankere muttered to herself, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Without a second thought, she reached out and grabbed the largest gourd, clutching it tightly to her chest. She raced out of the hut and hurried back to her home, giddy with excitement. As soon as she arrived, she locked herself and her daughter inside their hut, eager to see the treasures that awaited them. Lankere placed the gourd in the center of the room, her hands trembling with excitement. Her daughter watched with wide eyes as Lankere raised the gourd above her head and smashed it against the floor. But instead of gold and riches, a dark cloud of smoke burst forth from the gourd. Lankere gasped, stumbling backwards as venomous creatures began to pour out. Scorpions, snakes, and spiders, all writhing and hissing. Before she could react, the creatures lunged at her and her daughter, biting and stinging them with venomous fangs and pincers. Lankere screamed in agony, thrashing on the floor as the creatures swarmed over her. Her daughter cried out, but there was no escape. The venom worked quickly, paralyzing them both as the creatures continued their vicious attack. Within moments, Lankere and her daughter lay dead, their bodies twisted and contorted in pain. As the last of the creatures slithered away, the house fell silent. News of Lankere's gruesome fate spread quickly through the village. When Baba Oguntade heard of what had happened, the charm that had blinded him for so long finally broke. His mind cleared and he realized the terrible mistakes he had made. He wept bitterly for all the suffering Moronke had endured and rushed to her house to beg for her forgiveness. Moronke, ever kind and compassionate, forgave her father. Though the wounds of the past would take time to heal, they reconciled and Baba Oguntade moved into her home, where they lived peacefully from then on. As for the old woman in the forest, she was never seen again. Some say she was a spirit sent to test the hearts of those who crossed her path. Others believed she was a wise elder with knowledge of the unseen world. But whatever the truth, a lesson was clear. Greed and cruelty would always lead to ruin, while kindness, humility, and obedience to wisdom would bring blessings. And so, Moronke lived the rest of her days in peace. Her wealth not only measured in cowries and gold, but in the love and respect of those around her. She had passed the old woman's test, proving that true strength lay in the heart, not in the riches one possessed. The tale of Moronke and Lankere became a story told for generations, a reminder to all who heard it of the dangers of greed and the value of kindness, humility, and obedience. The end. We hope you enjoyed the story you just watched. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video, as it helps us create more videos like this for you to enjoy. Thank you.